Can you hear that?
A little bit.
Hello, everybody. This is Alicia and Becky.
I'm Becky.
And we're back with our live chat with my bestie to talk about some writing and some books, which is probably my favorite. Oh my goodness, I can't words today, apparently.
We're just hard.
Thing that is reoccurring that we have. I can't figure out what the hell that's called. But yeah. Words are hard.
Our weekly sessions that haven't been
Yes.
so weekly this summer. That's okay though. We'll fix it.
But that is a good point for anybody who's tuning in either now or later on. We are going to start doing Tuesday evenings. I think 8 your time, so 8 Eastern, 7 Central, 8:15.
About 8:15
Central time on Tuesdays. And we're going to actually have topics to talk about, which we have one today, and it's your topic, so I'm going to let you talk about it.
So this is like this kind of was sort of an accidental idea that popped into my head last night because I was awake much later than I should have been, sitting here doom scrolling rather than sleeping, and stumbled across yet another conversation about Sarah J. Maas and her writing, as one does in the middle of the night, and it popped into my head because there's a lot of argument back and forth on whether any of her series, but especially Throne of Glass, because it was her first and she was very young when she wrote it, whether it's any good or not, right? And I don't know what weird little worm went through my brain when I left a comment on somebody else's comment, but it occurred to me that, when you're reading it, and I was talking about this with my husband too, is that, especially the first couple of books, it's very, very obvious that she was a teenager and not experienced with writing.
I think she was early 20s when I looked that up.
But she definitely improved. But it sort of sparked this whole idea in my head of, where the crossroads is and the similarities and differences when you talk about good writing or bad writing. And then something that I think has gotten lost in the conversation a lot in recent years is good or bad storytelling, because I think they're very adjacent, but they're not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, as we have moved further away from oral headphones, I'm on a phone call. Go get your headphones. Taylor, headphones. Go get your headphones. Because I am on a phone call. With who? With my friend Alicia and anybody on the internet that wants to be watching. So I need you to go get your headphones. Thank you very much.
Mom, I didn't put that down.
And you didn't ask if you could come up, did you? Go get your headphones. Or turn the sound off. Or go downstairs. Those are your options. Anyway, so they're not the same thing. And I think that, as we've moved further and further away from oral storytelling as our primary means of entertainment and spreading news and communication, and more into the written word and all of its various adaptations, we have sort of lost the scope, like how much of a magnitude that is between those two adjacent but different concepts.
Right, because storytelling is the character, the arc of the story, all the threads that come through it, whereas writing is literally how you phrase things. Do you use metaphor? How much description versus dialogue, and pacing, all those things are all, well, pacing I guess is a little bit of both. So there's some overlap.
Yeah,
but
it's definitely overlap, and they're very, like I said, they're very, very adjacent, but not the same thing. And I think that's very prevalent, particularly in Throne of Glass with the series as a whole, in that, you see a lot of people talking about the writing's just bad. And I think, up to a certain point in the series, and I'd have to go back and reread them to tell you what that point is, but I think up to a certain point, I'd have to agree the writing's bad. Why? Because she was a new author, she was very young, and we're all bad when we start. None of us are very, very good at this when we start out.
I wouldn't say it was bad, but I would say it wasn't great.
Yeah.
So somewhere between not so bad and good.
Yeah. But if you take the series as a whole and think about all of the different pieces of that web that she wove together, the politics, the social interactions, the multi-layered relationships that she built between her characters and the arcs each of them had both individually and, as a collective. The storytelling was really phenomenal, in my opinion. And there's a lot of emotional impact.
I've only read the first book.
So I started Throne of Glass years ago, and I think I managed to drag myself through book 3 and quit. And I was just like, I can't get into it. And then I started reading it again last year because, I don't really like taking book recommendations off of BookTok because I've been disappointed a lot in that regard. Oh, Lord, we have tears. What's the matter? What do you mean you went downstairs for no reason? Baby, they're on the floor right next to your bed. They're buried underneath some stuff on the floor between your bed and your toy top. Okay, well then, you know what? Here. How about you snuggle with the dragon and keep the volume down? How about that? Okay, that? I'm not going to get them for you. You are 6 years old. You have legs. You can't go get them. Give me a minute. I'm sorry.
You have a kid. You're so patient. I'd be screaming.
I know. Anyway, so I made it through book 3 and I quit, and then I started again last year, and I was trying to kind of follow a path, I guess, because I had let BookTok convince me that I needed to read Court of Thorns and Roses. And I found that series to just be fun. Like, it
was engaging.
Yeah.
For the most part. I didn't make it through the entire series, but.
And so I went back and restarted Throne of Glass and managed to make it all the way in. Now, I didn't read the prequel until last week. I finally got around to reading Assassin's Blade. And I have my own opinions on that, and they very much do not agree with opinions I see everywhere else. But
you make me curious.
Like I said, the overarching storytelling is really phenomenal, especially that last book. There is such an intense emotional impact for the reader in that last book. And I think she did that very, very well.
Makes me want to continue, but she likes to do this trope or this choice in her storytelling that is something that generally pisses me off. So it's really hard for me to get past, and that's setting up all this time into the first character romance, like the first arc romance, and then just completely shit in the bed with that by the end of book 1, beginning of book 2. And I'm like, why did I just spend all that time rooting for people that don't fucking matter? A romance that doesn't matter.
She does. And yeah, I will say that with Throne of Glass, I feel like she does a lot of that because
it's a long series though, isn't it?
It is. And there's a handful of, yes, baby. Well, your tablet's right there.
I know my headphones.
Fine.
You're going on a walk?
Yeah, we're going on a walk, which means I'm about to be out of breath because me and Stairs are not friends.
That's all right.
That's ridiculous.
You're gonna get good at them.
Yeah, if my knees ever decided while work again. But I think that it kind of works in the Throne of Glass series with all the relationships because, like I said, her character is very young when she starts out. So she goes through, and how many of us went through? We had our first love, and then we had our second love, and then we had our third love, and we're just going to ignore how many of them there were until we found the love, you know?
That is a fair way to think of that.
There they are.
Right there, my human.
Mom vision. You know where things are.
People
I
like
do it all the time.
almost stepped on them last night, so I knew exactly where they were. Oh, did I ever show you my little,
I like that.
with my tiny little books?
They're the one where they actually have the books like written out inside of it.
Yeah, they are. So there's like, I got a whole bunch of Disney ones, and then I got some Star Wars ones, and a bunch of Harry Potter ones, and then some inspirational ones. But like, they're hard to open. But yeah,
That is really cool.
isn't it?
We just got a funny comment. I'm going to show it. I don't know if you can see it or not. Sometimes late at night, I go out in the garden and cover myself in dirt so I can pretend that I'm a carrot. I don't know what that's about. Go over it's paranormal, but that's hilarious. Thank you for making us laugh. Oh.
I don't blame you.
See, when you
Carrots have
put
a
it
lot less
that
stress.
way,
But I don't blame them. Carrots have a lot less stress.
heck, well, would they be stressed about being eaten? I don't think they're aware enough to know that they're food.
Probably not.
That's a good way of putting. I think I might be able to get through the like another Throne of Glass because I had to listen to it on audiobook in order to be like, okay, I could probably continue with this series, and that's simply because of when I tried to read it with my eyeballs. She stylistically did a whole lot of things that I don't like. So, like, I know we've probably talked about this before, but like burying dialogue. I like it when they bookend things. So like you have dialogue, some action happens or description happens, wherever not dialogue stuff happens, and then you end with dialogue. But when you do dialogue stuff, dialogue stuff, dialogue stuff, dialogue stuff in one big paragraph, you lose me. I don't remember. I can no longer decipher what's dialogue and what's not. With how quickly I try to read or I tend to read. So like that irritated the shit out of me. And the dialogue tags. I hate dialogue tags too. So like, but that's the editor in me. So that's why audiobooks, I get to shut that part of my brain off and I only notice repeated words instead. So like of all the things that I get when I read with my eyeballs. So giving her a second chance, the first time I read Throne of Glass, I gave it a 3. The second time I gave it a 3.5. So like not a great improvement, but still on the positive side of the half, you know. It was readable. However, in Court and Throne of ACOTAR, you're not going to convince me that first thing with the romance, that pissed me off. Didn't think it was necessary to do that. I mean, I get it for the whole of the first 3 books that I read, but I also had a really big issue with the storytelling in the 3rd book.
Well, you know what's interesting with, you know, with that first romance is that like that probably could have even, I mean, the emotional stakes probably wouldn't have been as high, but it probably could have stayed a platonic relationship and not changed the story much at all.
Yep. I mean, I don't know. I get the choices. They're just not my favorite ones. And so like that puts me off a little bit for the story in general. I don't want to say she didn't do the right thing because that's her book, that's her story. How the fuck am I supposed to know that? It's just not what I would have done. And sometimes that's a good thing. And sometimes I really don't like it when it's not what I would have done. So I don't know.
That's fair. It all goes back to, you know, does the storytelling outweigh the writing? And for me, once I made it all the way, and you know, you get a lot of people who will do the, oh, you just got to make it through the first 3 books and then it gets really good. And you know, the response to that is typically, if it takes me 3 books to enjoy something, that's too much. But it doesn't go right back to that argument that storytelling and writing are not the same. And if you stick with the story, you know, you get the payout at the end. And I think that's something that she does really, really well. Is you get that storytelling payout at the end of the series.
Okay. I'm gonna actually give it a try. Book 2. You said past book 3, so like book 4 it starts to get pretty good. Okay.
Yeah,
I'll give it till book 4. And I'll keep trying. But I agree with you. I think storytelling is way more important than writing. Like bad writing can make a story like a good story just not be readable. Like,
Yeah.
there's no way you can enjoy it but it has to be pretty darn bad for that to happen. And that, like, especially as somebody who used to have to grade freshman English papers, knowing how bad writing can be, it has to be pretty bad. So, like, I think most published authors, the story like the writing can, especially debut authors, the writing can be pretty bad for me to keep going if the story's good. Sometimes though, like there's a debut that I just read for Bite Me Box a couple months ago, and I was like, the concept was great. The writing was actually pretty good too. But there was this chunk in the middle where the story just like it did this and then it just went, and then
that midway drag.
Yes. And like I get the slow building of like these enemies to lovers kinds of things, but a lot more could have been done in a lot shorter amount of time to build up the intimacy without needing to go through the same thing over and over again. Like the editor should have like squashed that down and then expanded the end of it, because the end of it, like the last 50 pages was just like boom, 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 boom. I'm like, one, you could have made this one book, and probably like the duology could have been made into one book. But so what would you consider that? That's not really storytelling or writing. That's pacing, which is another
That's a pacing issue. And I think, honestly, I think pacing applies to both, because if you take a look, if we break down storytelling, if we go back to the roots of, oral storytelling, and, you've got your traveling troops or your traveling minstrel, and they show up and they tell their stories. If they don't have a good pacing skill as they're telling this story, yeah, you're still going to have an audience, because what the hell else are these people going to do for entertainment in those times, right? But at the same time, you're going to put half your audience to sleep because you didn't pace yourself well, or you didn't put enough of yourself into it. There's not enough flair. There's not enough, enunciation, or not enunciation, emphasis. There's not enough. I knew it was an E word. There's not enough emphasis where there needs to be emphasis. And that is, in my opinion, much more obvious in oral storytelling, because you can see it, you can hear it, there's more sensory input. With writing, I think that, and I've seen multiple editors and multiple books that talk about pacing and how to do it on a proven successful scale, which is great. I mean, I used one of them. I used this one, Save the Cat Writes a Novel.
The beats, having certain beats at certain times, and
yeah. But I think it's harder because even though you have your plot points, not every plot point is going to be some big ostentatious show of a change in plot or a major tension. Some of them are going to be a lot more subtle, which again is fine.
Something bigger,
right? But on the page, that's harder to, like, as you're reading through, unless you've been trained to spot it and you know what you're looking for. It's harder to be like that is a plot point, that is a beat point.
And often it doesn't. You don't even realize it till you've gotten to what it's built to, and you're like, oh, the thing they talked about back then was a plot point. I didn't even know it.
Right.
It's done well enough. It really should be that way. That kind of building to a reveal where it's in the back of your head going, well, is it this? Is this where they're going with it? They did this. Are they doing, like, even with somebody who has a lot of experience reading and writing and editing or whatever both of us do, sometimes we get distracted by those things, and then we get like the coming out of left field, this side's left field, and we're like, oh, you had me confused on this thing over here, but really you were building that. That's fantastic. I love it when an author can surprise me. It's not very often, but absolutely. And
that's something that I'm working on trying to do with my novel, is that, like, I'm trying to build all of those little minor points and the little Easter eggs, not just for the story here and now, but for, this is a planned series. So, how do I put in little things now that are going to impact the end of the whole series? And so I've got, going through, I use, the software that I use, and it's got just comments after comments, like every document, just comments, like all these little things that I need to work in. And then I think I showed you once before I moved, I had like Post-its all stuck all over my monitor. I obviously I took those down because we moved, but they're all like now
in a notebook.
because I brought my laptop with me when we moved because I was like, yeah, I'm gonna write while we move. I did not.
It's always a nice thought, but execution doesn't often.
Yeah, well, when you spend more than a month sharing a hotel room with your husband and your 2 small children, it's
Bless your heart. I don't. I cannot. I cannot. Then again, I'm in a house, but it's like I'm with my 2 boys almost all the time. So we even started going to the Y together. So as a family.
hotel rooms are so small though. There's no separation.
Yeah, that being on top of each other like that.
Drives me nuts.
After a week, usually I'm like, all right, I'm done with this. How long did it take you to be done with it?
Oh, I was done with it even before we moved because before that I was on bed rest. Like, and he was still working. Like, he was home for those first few days after I came home from the hospital, but then like he went back to work because he was finishing up everything that he needed to finish up there. So it's just me and the kids were out of school. So it's me and these 2 kids who do nothing but argue over the color of air. And, what does it sound like or what does it taste like when a horn honks? They would argue over that. That is something that they would argue over. And it's just constant with them. So trying to get anything done, let alone like for the move was difficult, but then trying to do like, any of my creative pursuits was just not at all.
It's the thing that falls to the wayside. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, well, and it was partially deliberate too because I would think about sitting down and writing, and then trying to write through that chaos. I feel like the writing would have suffered really badly, which would have been very discouraging. Whereas if I tabled it until after the chaos was over, I felt like the quality would have been better from the get-go, and I would have less that I would have to completely rewrite during the revision process, which is already going to be a bear.
Which I get. I'm the kind of person, like, if I'm in the midst of chaos and I can if I don't have to immediately do anything and I can just write, I can ignore everything else that's going around me. Like, that's my safe place. Like, just let me go in there and ignore everybody else.
I can do that with reading. I cannot do that with writing.
I can't do that with reading as much, depending on what kind of reading it is. I know you strictly eyeballs. Audiobook, like if I can drown everybody out with an audiobook and they're not talking behind me like they sometimes like to do, and I can hear them more than I can hear my book, but most of the time audiobook I can do that with. But if I'm sitting there reading a book and people are talking and things are going on, and like I can't concentrate on it as well. So it's weird. Not the same way like I engage with writing, because I feel like it engages more of my brain. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does.
But don't generally make sense, so that's fine.
It does. I'm an escapist reader, so I don't like to. I mean, I like books that require some amount of effort, but I don't want the whole book to have to be an intellectual exercise for me to get through it. I want to just be able to fall into the story. So for me, if I can fall into the story, I can block out the rest of the world. Doesn't matter. But if I can't fall into it, then everything else is a distraction. Like even the air conditioning running is a distraction.
Yes. I think for me, it's been the years and years of training to when I read, I'm working.
Mm-hmm.
So, because especially the editing or grading papers, when I'm reading, I'm working. So writing doesn't feel like work, even though now it is.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it still feels like work. Writing my stuff doesn't feel like work. Writing as a ghostwriter sometimes it still feels, most of the time still feels like work. So, but.
I hit a spot in my book recently, like in the last few days. Like I got to the end of one section where like I knew what needed to happen in that section, and I've written most of it. Some of it I may end up rewriting, and I highlighted that because I'm just like, I don't know if that really fits there. But the part that's got me is the point at the end of that section. And that point's very important because we meet certain characters there that are going to have an impact on the rest of the story. like a very large impact on the rest of the story. But it's a boring scene. They're at a feast. There's nothing happening, So it's like it's a total slog in my head to try to get through it without making it seem like a slog.
Give me an
So
example of something you're trying to set up. Like, you don't have to give me the specifics, but in vague, like even tropes or plot points or whatever. What are you trying to set up?
So I'm trying to set up an interplay between my main characters and their secondary characters that are important to their story, even from the beginning. So they're there as a group, and then I've got these new characters. So it's basically these two different groups, and one is trying to be accepted by the other. The other doesn't want them there at all, but doesn't have a choice. And the second group, their society, their social norms, their culture is built off of the concept of balance. And so trying to get enough approval to stay there and work the problems that they need to work while maintaining a balance, not offending them while still trying to be investigative. Like, it's kind of a whole balancing act. But in this one scene, I'm trying to portray, there's the initial introduction, they sit down for the feast, and I'm trying to portray sort of like there's a welcome to them, but it's not the type of welcome that they would be used to back home. It's not very warm, and like trying to set up that I don't even think I'm describing this very well, but trying to set up the interplay between them and build the tension there. There's more of it that comes along, and a lot of that tension winds up even getting built not between the two groups, but between this group, my primary group, and then my secondary group, who is a bunch of leadership. They've all got their own people in their own society. So like setting up tension between the two groups, some of that's actually going to be set from group and then, just normal people, as opposed to, my two leadership groups. And I'm finding that to be a bit of a challenge. So basically the way that I tackled that last night was I just decided, and I don't like doing this, and that goes back to the whole just write it down even though I know it's bad and I can fix it later. I don't like doing that. I'd rather just have the idea be right, even if the wording's not right and the grammar's not right. Like, I would like for the idea itself to be right, and it's not right now. But I've got the
right now. What do you have happening right now?
So I'm actually on the scene after that right now. I sat down today and got almost 400 words in this afternoon.
Nice.
Zahara, my female lead, she ditched her husband and she's going off exploring around the island. And so she's going to, in this particular scene, she's going to stumble across the, for lack of a better word at the moment, we'll call it temple. The temple to the frigid goddess, and some of the acolytes who maintain the temple. And so she's going to end up spending some time with them. And the frigid goddess is also, she's also the goddess of beauty. So on this island, we've got, they're a dual society. So they worship, the goddess of beauty and the god of healing, and they're very opposite from each other. Okay. They always feel slightly superior to the other group. Like it's a whole very like cultural interplay going on there. So she meets up with these acolytes of the goddess, and she's going to spend some time learning what they do, not just in the temple, but also how they make the beauty products that they sell across the empire, that they trade to, the neighboring kingdom with, kind of really diving into who these people are together, and then as they're two separate like subcultures. So she'll go through that, and then she'll kind of have a similar meeting in the next section with the acolytes of the molten god. And
this is happening after the boring part that you don't think is right?
Yeah, because they're gonna have, no, I can't do this first, because they're gonna have the welcome feast with the leadership before they get more free reign around the island.
So there has to be the setup in order to get to that scene. Is there anything you absolutely have to keep that you already have in your current scene now, even though you don't think the idea is right?
Mom,
What?
never mind.
So in the current scene, do you mean the feast scene?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, so the scene that I wrote for the feast itself is actually very short. So I have this whole section. It's actually my longest section to date, but it covers basically like, so, you know, they get to the island, they get off the ship, and then like everything that happens in between getting off the ship, going to the rooms, and then going to the feast. And that whole section is like a huge chunk. Which is probably going to end up getting broken down during a revision, but for right now, it's a big chunk. So the scene in the feast is actually fairly short compared to the rest of it. There's introduction, like they walk the hall, they make, you know, kind of make internal observations. They get introduced. They met most of the council on the dock, so now they're meeting the governor and the governor's wife, and so that's going to be, you know, a major interplay there. They meet, they sit, they start eating. There's a little bit of conversation. And the way that the conversation, not so much what gets said, but the vibe of the conversation becomes important, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to design that vibe is what got me last night. So finally, I just put some conversation points down and moved on, because that was like frying my brain so bad.
Something that I don't know if it'll help you, but the only thing I could think to suggest when going back to that scene would be to find an anchor in the scene. So something that whoever that point of view character is that you're in can keep coming back to, that will slowly increase the stakes of this meal. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Even
And I
if
think
it's like,
I kind of subconsciously did that, because I'm kind of sort of like focusing, even in the conversation that my two mains have after they leave the feast and they're walking through the hallways, they're really talking a lot about the governor's, how he presents himself, how he interacted, the expression on his face, what little he says, you know, so stuff like that. Because I want him, like, he's saying the right things. He's giving the welcome speech. His wife is more open. But he, just as a person, and also because he was raised, he's from the half of the society that worships the frigid goddess. So, like, his natural composure is to be very cold and very standoffish. And so we're really leaning into that in that particular section, because it's going to be important later.
A third party, so like an acolyte or a server or something that your main point of view character can see him interacting with, that helps ping these things more so than just being, I guess, judgmental, for the lack of a better word.
Can you go to your friend's house? Yeah. I suppose so. You know, say hi to your godmother. Okay. I love you. Bye.
I love you
I'll text you
too.
and let you. What? She said she liked me too. I'll text you and let you know if we have to go practice tonight. So right now I still haven't heard.
I know.
I know you don't. Just saying I'm going to keep you informed. Okay?
So I'm going.
He just had a birthday. How old is he now? 10?
11.
11? Jesus fucking Christ. He's almost a
No.
teenager. Good luck with that. I know,
Yeah.
you've already had 2, but
Different ballgame.
Yeah, because he's a boy, and so it's gonna be completely different. Different hormones. Yeah. I forgot what we were.
But yeah, so
yeah,
there will actually be a series of tertiary characters that they're going to interact with that will have less of a problem being talkative to the leads. But that one just like, I don't know what it was, but I was sitting here last night trying my damnedest because it was like the end of a section that I had started a couple of months ago. And I was like, I just want to get this section done and I want to move on. And so I managed it, but it's one of those ones that I know I'm going to have to go back because I'm just like, it doesn't gel.
And you might not know what the thing it needs is until you're much farther into the story and go, I need to set this up sooner and get to go back and put that in that scene. Right. So.
Or even like, I have a feeling it's going to be one of those things like I'm going to finish the draft and then not touch it or look at it for a couple of weeks, just kind of let it gel in my head and then go back and reread it. And I'm going to be like, oh, I should have done this or that or both or something. So that'll eventually happen. But
get you. I'm trying to think of all the feast themes that I've read and all of the like court of whatevers that because I've read a lot of court stuff here lately. Stasha Stark, by the way, I've been reading her series. Enjoy that a lot. There's a lot of sex, which coming from me says something. There's like a lot of unnecessary sex. And mostly it's unnecessary because it's the same goddamn thing over and over and over. Like they're not even getting inventive. It's driving me crazy. But every time they're alone together, they have sex. And I'm like, I get it. You're really ill with each other. Can we move on, please? But a lot of tense moments that are often in the silences of somebody noticing something or a small movement or something that's repeated tends to be that tension builder for something later. Not necessarily a character or somebody who's going to directly talk to them, but like I know there was one scene, I can't remember what book it was, where a character kept seeing a servant girl, and like in that specific scene, that feast kept referencing back to her and the look on her face when she heard something, like little clues to like they hear so much stuff because do you notice the servants? No, you ignore them, which means they can stalk about and listen to what you're saying. So like sometimes paying attention to them can give you a clue to other things they might have heard, which is just like one of those tools that you can use to raise the tension really high in a very otherwise slow scene.
Right.
So that's mainly what my thought was. But I'm also the kind of writer that if I don't have it right now, I can't move on until I have it. So
I don't necessarily know that particular scene needs to be much any longer than it already is. It's just more the content. So like if I go back, I have it pulled up right now. If I go back and look at it, nope, that's not the right one. Oh, I didn't realize I actually finished 2 sections last night. That's awesome. And it's not the section right after. There's a whole other one in between. I was wrong. Nope. There, I guess. Okay. Yeah, so if I take, I have each section kind of has like 3 subsections to them. And it's like 2,000, 1,000. So well over 8,000 words just in those 3 subsections. And the last one is 2,000 words. But only about 3/4 of that is like the actual feast. The rest of it is all just, getting there. But
like 2,000 words? You say? I'm trying to do the numbers in my head. You know me. So about 2,000 words, would you say?
The subsection is 2,000 words. But it's like if I go 1,100 of those 2,000 are just the feast.
Okay, because my thought was it needs to be at least 1,000 words for a feast. Like if you're going to actually get into it, it needs to be at least 1,000, 1,500, somewhere around there. If it was any less than that, then that can be summarized.
Yeah, and I'm trying to do like a lot of it is. I mean, there is dialogue, and it's not just sprinkled. Like there's it's fairly evenly paced through, but a lot of it is his. So it's in my male lead's point of view, this particular section. And so there's he's making a lot of internal observations and just kind of like clocking all the little things that either like support what he wants out of this or throw a monkey wrench in his plans or, put him on his toes a little bit. So lots of just little
internal reaction.
Yeah, a lot of internal stuff. And there will be discussion between other characters later about those observations, because otherwise they just kind of go nowhere, I think. Just based on what my plot points are for later.
Right. Does he interact with like his wife? Right? That's okay. Like even just a look or a touching, a press of his hand to her knee or something, like, are you showing her reacting through his point of view to what's going on at all?
A bit, yeah.
Okay. So like those little moments, I feel like, are some of those things that really amp up the tension for me as a reader. Is
right.
Get the internal, get the other, and then the connection between them. We're like, yeah, we're going to talk about that fucking later. That kind of thing. But I know you're a good writer, so I know you probably got a lot of this basic stuff in there. Just as a reader, those are the things that really get me in those kinds of scenes. So
right. And I mean, there's little details throughout. I mean, I'm at like 65,000 words or something like that at this point. But like, there's little things throughout the whole story that I deliberately, like, I want them to come off as, oh, this is just a little detail, sort of a sensory, kind of make it more three-dimensional, that are going to matter later. So trying to hit that balance where, like, because I feel like that's a tricky one too. Because, like, first of all, you know how I write, and second, like, I know I can already foresee some of the comments that like, do we need this? Is this important? Like, and some of them are not for this book, but they will be later.
See, and as long as you know that, you can just be like, yeah, that's for this, and then we can reframe or whatever is necessary for that. But it's so funny, the editing brain versus the writing brain. So like, if you're asking me writing advice, we're writing, we're not talking about editing and publishing something. So like, we can worry about that shit later. Which we will go through it. Don't worry. You know how I am as an editor. So, but I think thinking like a reader sometimes instead of like a writer gives me more things, I guess, closer to what the end product should be versus me trying to think like a writer, which is funny. It brings us back to that original discussion we were having of writing versus storytelling. But thinking as a reader, I'm thinking more about the story versus thinking like a writer. I'm thinking more about my word choice.
Right.
So word choice can be changed.
You know what's funny is that a lot of the time, once I get going, word choice like just kind of happens. But every now and then I'll stumble on a word and I'll just get stuck there.
That's why I like the thesaurus. I'll start putting words in and saying like, can I find it this way? Is it adjacent? What way can I go to find that word?
I have my, I have a dual monitor system happening here. So I have my documents over here, and then over there I usually keep, a Google pulled up so that I can, because it's just faster for me to have it right there rather than try to pull out a physical thesaurus, which I have a bunch of them.
Oh, I used the online one too. It's fine. Usually I get a defined word in the Google Doc and then travel from there.
Yeah. I think what's going to happen is that, like, when I get to a point where I'm ready to do things like look for, patterns of repetitive word use.
I have a list for you.
Then I'll spend a lot more. Yeah. Well, I mean, specifically my particular ones, but like, I'll go back and I'll look at the sources at that point, like, kind of try to figure it. And like, I've already picked out some of my patterns in this particular project, but.
Can you tell me what some of the words are you've got pattern-wise? I like to use fingers a lot.
So
and back.
More a habit than just like a specific word, but like I'm really bad about directing the reader's gaze, if that makes sense. Like looked left, looked right. He looked at me, I looked at him, stuff like that. Like, yeah. And not just so much like using the word looked, but like leaned in is one that I use quite a bit. Like, so I do a lot of choreography for no good reason.
I used to do a lot more choreography when I first started until I realized I didn't need it.
Yeah,
Sometimes
and I know I
need
don't.
it.
And we'll go back. Some of it I want to stay like here and there, but I know I've used a lot more of that particular salt than needs to be in this dish. So we'll go back and fix that. But some of the things that I like stumble across, and what's funny is that like, and I still can't pronounce this right. Scriveners. Yeah, they don't catch all of the. I mean, they catch the big things, but they don't catch all of the little, like, weird things that I would get if I were like using Word. So like if I accidentally write the word "the" twice in a row, it doesn't catch it. Like when I get ahead of myself.
Isn't as good as Word either.
Yeah.
Although it would catch the double "the," but that's because I have Grammarly on my browser.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's obviously not going to stay in Scrivener. It's going to have to like be converted over to something else eventually. But for right now, I just like the organization of it. But yeah, it doesn't catch all of my little oopses. So then like I'll go back and reread a certain section because I have notes all over the place. Like, hey, you need to go check this scene to make sure these details match those details. Like just little comments that I leave myself, as I'm going. So I'll go back later when I'm bored or stuck on something and I'll look back at that first thing and I'm like, what the fuck did I write there? That doesn't make any sense. And then I figure out, because it didn't catch the weird little shit that I accidentally typed when I was going faster than my fingers. Like, my brain was working faster. So I think, once I get through draft 1 and I'm going back through trying to integrate all of those little comments and do my first round of editing and revision on my own, I'm going to be, I'm probably going to be drinking a lot of wine at that
point. That's funny because it's backwards. The quote is to write drunk, edit sober.
Yeah, but I mean, like writing I can do. Editing drives me nuts.
Yeah, I like to say that it's not the fun part, but whatever part I'm in generally is not the fun part. Betty and I talk about this all the time. We're like, if I could just go back to start drafting. Ooh, can you still hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can hear you.
So it's doing the circle thing for me. It was like when we're editing, like, if only I was drafting again. And when we're drafting, we're like, if I was just editing again, this would be so much easier. Like, it's always the part we're not in that we want to be in. And the part we're in is sucky. And then we think to ourselves, why do we do this to ourselves? You know why? Because I couldn't do anything else. I don't know about
you. So you can see your name on the cover. That's why. Mm-hmm. So you can see your name on the cover. That's what I do.
Maybe a little bit. I think my books just got delivered. Hey. Hold on, give me 1 second. There's some books. You see my shorts.
Yep, he's got the other two.
Hi, Jason.
Thank you. I get to send book boxes out, pack them today, and send some of them out tomorrow. And that's my last set of books.
Nice.
That is here. Yes, which I've been waiting for because you're supposed to go out in the 1st. But yeah, sometimes getting money situated to get all of the things necessary. I don't think I told you about that. I'm not going to say which publisher it was. They've been very nice and worked with me pretty well. But I went to buy the 2 books from the same publisher because we have 3 in this box. And they charged me full price. And I'm like, we're a retailer. Like, what the fuck? So we only got one of the books still at full price. And I had to call, like, I need a refund. Like, what are you guys doing? And I called customer services a couple times, and I talked to the rep, and I talked to this other person. It took me like a week and a half for them to be like, yes, we can refund them that money. Like, you better refund me that money because
Right.
we're a reseller. You don't charge full price to a reseller, a retailer, whatever you want to call it. And so finally got that done. They couldn't get the other books until I got a refund on the first one. So it was this whole process. They came through for me and whatnot, but I was just like, really? And I brought it up to the first customer service guy, and he completely ignored my questions. He was just like, you're welcome. And because my first thing was like, thanks for doing this, but hey, what about this thing? You're welcome. No answer on anything else. So I get it. Sometimes you don't want to deal with that shit and you just ignore that it happened.
That, and I feel like if you're dealing with like a customer service center or call center, a lot of the times what happens is, your first tier of employee that you talk to, a lot of times is kind of trained to avoid certain things and then escalate.
Escalated myself. Because immediately after I didn't get an answer, I emailed that other person, and then I called back, and I emailed them again, and then I emailed them. I probably emailed them 8 or 9 times to get it settled, and called 3 times. But that's my job. I'm that type of person who will do that until it's fixed. You will fix this, and you will do it right, or we're not going to have a fun time. Because whereas I am nice I'm pretty nice most of the time, but when you get something up my craw, I'm gonna turn into a bitch real fast because that's not how shit is done. And you don't treat me that way. So yes. Kind of like when did I ever tell you that I tried to get my tax return back? It took them 6 years to give me my tax return. Of $5,000. Like, we got interest on it, which was nice. But they kept saying, well, it's past this, it's past time that you can claim this. And I'm like, I have called every single year, multiple times a year, and been told this is taken care of, and you guys aren't doing it. And the last time I called 3 times. I called them, they said they couldn't do anything, I hung up. I called them again, got a new person, said they couldn't do this, hung up, called again. Got a third person, they're like, you need a rep. I'm like, will you get me one? I sure will. And she did, and she fixed it. So just keep calling back till you get somebody who will freaking help you. But most people will give up, and that's why they lose out on the money and shit doesn't happen. Yeah. Customer service, long waits will not deter me. I will keep calling you. Sorry.
I will wake up at weird hours just to be the first person to call you. And you will have to deal with me before you finish having enough coffee.
Yes. And I'll be perfectly polite while I talk to you. But you can kill people with kindness. So, because then they don't want to not help you because you're being so nice to them where everybody else is being an asshole.
Right.
Yeah. Until you become the asshole. It takes a long time for me to get there, though. Anyways, I finally got my books. Yay. Sorry to deter us from that kind of shit. What were we talking about before that? This is my stoner brain. Yeah.
My mom brain.
Yeah.
For nothing.
I know we were talking about building up and writing and like editing and stuff. Did we want to talk any more about storytelling versus actual writing? Because I know, like, personally, I remember being in my master's program and having to read literary fiction all the goddamn time, which is pretty much just writing. Like, worry about how you phrase things, make it pretty, make it do this, make it do that. And I'm just like, I am bored. I am bored by every single one of these stories because it's the same thing over and over again. Which is funny because I read fantasy and that's the same thing over and over and over again, but at least there's something happening. Sorry.
I think that, like, I think one of the issues with literary fiction is that, like, you get this contemporary advice where, use different paragraph lengths, go with shorter paragraphs instead of longer paragraphs, don't go for like big block prose. Change up your sentence structure and your sentence length so they don't all look the same. And I think that's something that, like, conventionally did not happen a lot in literary fiction. Like, it was all like
long,
like
flowing sentences.
Yeah, like there, and I'm so guilty of that, particularly in this series because I am dealing with royalty, like old school type royalty. So the way that they talk is different. But just like it was like there was this template for how to write a book, and everybody did it the same way. And so, you don't get a lot of variety. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. But and it just goes right back to, are you writing a book or are you telling a story?
Mm-hmm. What's funny is that Jason and I were talking earlier, because we were talking about ACOTAR in general, but we also mentioned like Twilight. A lot of people consider Twilight to be bad writing. And I'm like the actual writing of it, the word choice and all those other things wasn't terrible. Again, much like ACOTAR, wasn't terrible. But there was something about what she did with Bella that made people eat it up. And what made it successful, because everybody's like, Bella was bland. Like, she had no personality, albeit she had a very tiny bit of personality. And the reason that worked so well is because you got to insert yourself into the story and her point of view and like pretty much interpret things the way you would, which made it a more engaging story as it went. So I don't know if it's storytelling or if it's writing, but it's something like the combination of how she did that made it so wildly popular, because you could just stick yourself in that story. I mean, to a degree, and engage with the.
Oi, hey, no. I just could never get into the Twilight. So, like, there's some really famous and popular series that I just
couldn't do it.
Never could. I didn't get into that one. I absolutely refuse to have anything to do with 50 Shades of Grey.
No, won't read it. I won't watch the movie either.
I won't either. Honestly, the only thing that I ever liked about 50 Shades was like there's that one scene that I see pop up on TikTok every now and then where Anna's telling off the interior decorator, and that's the only thing that I found amusing about the whole thing.
But it's an example of something being so terribly written that it didn't matter what storyline you gave it. The storyline was terrible too, which double whammy. But I would never be able to get past the writing to get into that story specifically. And it's so funny. I read a lot of fan fictions turned published novels, because right now we're in a big, Hermione era. Like, we have literally 4 books coming out this year that I know of that are popular and traditionally published that are Hermione retellings. I just read one. It was actually pretty funky and it was ridiculous. I loved it. But a lot of the time, that storyline tends to fall flatter, I feel like, in those kinds of retellings, if that makes any sense.
Uh-huh.
And that might be because the characters are borrowed, that there's no ability to put as much depth. Mm-hmm.
She's a noisy creature.
Mm-hmm. Kids. Like I always say, more power to you for being a mama. I got to borrow them for every other weekend, and then 2 weeks during the summer, and that was like, nope, not doing this to myself. I know obviously they come out of you, but I'm good. My books are my babies. So, anyways, I forgot what I was saying before that.
I think that like a lot of my problem with something like, if we go back to the 50 Shades thing, is that she didn't do any research.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, particularly like if you're writing something that's not been, even with fantasy, I mean, I've done a lot of research for something that I've made up the entire world, like, and it's not a completely alien world either. Like, they've got the same flora, the same fauna, the same, geographical terrains. And, I haven't gone way off the cliff with this. I don't have, the hanging islands of Pandora happening in my, I'm not going nuts with it, but still a lot of research. And she did none of it, particularly into a lifestyle that she is very blatantly, obviously not a part of.
Yeah.
And it came off, I've never bought the books, I've never read them, but I have read snippets, that have been shared via blogs and, in other places. And I think my big problem there is that, it ends up doing what you don't want to do and glorifying abuse. And then if you looked at, I forget who it was, somebody did a breakdown of the timeline of those 3 books. And like that whole storyline, that whole complicated, fall in love, get married, like it was like a 2-month thing. Something like that. Like it was, yeah, it was
Quick.
not. So I don't know. I just can't gel with it. But then I take a look at somebody like Matthew Riley, who you and I have, I've recommended some of his work to you for some of your reading challenges, and he's an Australian author, and I really get a kick out of him. But I almost didn't really get into reading too much of him because, like, the first couple of books of his that I bought them in ebook form because they're just, my phone's easier for my hand to hold than a book these days. And I remember reading through them and thinking that, like I said, he's Australian, so he's a native English speaker. And I remember thinking, whoever his publisher was took the Australian English, translated it into German for the German market, and then translated it back to English. And I think that because you would have a sentence where it would just blah, 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 but like, obviously the word the shows up a time or two in most sentences. But the word was D-I-E and not T-H-E. And I'm like, so, here we've got the German word for the showing up in a story not written by a German, sold in a country that is not Germany. So, little things like that, the lack of attention to detail there really bothered me. But he writes these very, very fast-paced action stories, and he's got this one series that's like, I don't even know how to describe it, almost like sci-fi meets Indiana Jones or something. I don't know, it's interesting. But the little things that he manages to tie together, the storytelling is really fun, and it just goes back to, are you writing a book or are you telling a story? And I think the problem with a lot of authors is that they neglect to do one or the other.
Right.
Whereas, in my opinion, all the best are, a combination of the two. You're telling a story and you're writing a book because you're paying attention to those details.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think it needs to be a combination of both. I mean, it needs to be a combination of several things. But boiling it down to those two, writing or storytelling. Storytelling should be a little bit higher, I feel like, than the writing. So you don't want it to be too posh that it's not accessible.
Right.
Or that the words bog it down. But the storytelling should be first and foremost. It should be your characters, their motivations, and how the world is fucking with them. It should be your main concerns when you're writing a story. So
right. And the decisions they make that drive the plot.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, and then that goes to another thing when it comes to pacing, is that if you're writing a book, a lot of people, like, they don't let the character decisions, the character actions be what drives the plot. They just roll with it, and the characters don't have enough agency. And now you've got flat characters that are unrelatable, and just goes right back to telling a story.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think it's a good way of summarizing that dichotomy. See, and I'm such a anal, pretentious editor. And
I'm just a pretentious writer, so think like for example, I'll read this to you. Okay, this is what I wrote, part of what I wrote today. Curiosity has ever been a compulsion in my heart, the drive to discover, learn, and know, a constant companion. If I had been otherwise, I would never have found the passages in the Imperial Palace or the secret places they led to. So, like, I'm really pretentious in my sentence structure and my word choice from time to time. But it's kind of hard for me to, like, that's what my monologue sounds like in my damn head.
To me, that sounds like the character.
Yeah.
So, like, your word choice denotes a lot about your character. because how we say things, which is a reaction, is going to denote our feelings, the way we present ourselves in the world. And the same is true of our characters. So you've talked about writing royalty. So having a little bit of pretentious language or structure or whatever you want to call it works for what you're doing. I just sound like a pretentious ass no matter how I write, unless I'm writing my slum girl and fuck is every other word. I mean,
it's a weird style because like I know how it looks on page, and that's different than how it sounds in my head. Like, because like I said, that's just how my inner monologue sounds. But to me, that inner monologue is sarcastically loquacious. Like she likes to use lots of words, and she's kind of an asshole, right? But on the page, it comes off as very different than the way that I see myself internally, even though like the word structure and the sentence structure is the same. Like it reads very different than it feels to me. So that's a fun little maze to navigate, like trying to, because there are definitely places in the book where I would really like for that sort of like sarcastic inner monologue to really shine. Because yes, she's royalty, but until she got married, she was also a complete hedonist. So I'm not trying to, she doesn't have a stick up her ass, but she will also use formality and, protocol when dealing with people, sort of not just as a mask, but as a weapon. So it's very multifaceted.
it kind of goes back to what I was saying about calling people and having to kill them with kindness, sometimes killing them by being polite because then they don't want to, and using it as a weapon. So I absolutely connect with that. I get excited to see if I interpret it the same way you intend it. Because you're never going to be in complete control, no matter how you write it. You are never going to be in complete control of how somebody interprets it. That's just,
right.
They're bringing their experiences to the story. So someone who's also a sarcastic asshole will probably get it. Somebody who is not probably won't. So, I mean, there's things you can do to make it easier to display that, but those are so situational that I couldn't give general advice on that if I tried. But reading it out loud, I feel like you did, like I heard exactly the tone you were going for because you read it to me, and the words fit it perfectly. So I don't know.
I think what I need to do too is like when I have those inner rants where I'm just thinking stuff like that to myself, like I really need to pay attention to like, what is my body doing? What is my face doing? Like, did I hear myself kind of like snort in my head? Like not like out loud, but like that I kind of scoff inside my own head,
Mm-hmm.
Like I think I need to start being more aware of how I react both internally and externally to the thoughts that are running through my head, and see if there's a way to sort of incorporate that maybe through involuntary reactions rather than full-on thoughts, because I feel like if I try to explain it as a full-on thought, it kind of loses its oomph,
Mm-hmm. That brings me to another thing I find interesting about storytelling, and like that you don't need to actually show the reader everything. They will infer a lot on their own.
Yeah.
And so allowing the reader the respect that you believe they're smart enough to get it based on the context that you built. So I wouldn't worry about the pretentious versus the sarcasm too much. I think people will get it based
so funny about like respecting the intelligence of the readers, that I absolutely do. What I lose though when I'm writing is like, I can't remember a damn thing. So if I don't put it down, I will forget that it's a dot that connects to another dot at some point. So it's just, writing those details that really I could let a reader infer, but it's more for me. And then I just forget to take it out.
Okay, no worries.
But we'll
Bloody
get through it. I'm
ribbons
so
have been
bad.
done.
I'm definitely more than halfway done, but I've still got a huge chunk left to go.
It's been
And
a
then
while
all of
since
the-
I've written a big project like that.
Yeah, and it's funny because I actually did think about come up here. I would get on Facebook and message him from the computer, but I had to change my Facebook password on my phone because somebody in, I think it was Indonesia, managed to steal my password. And now I don't remember what the password is, so I haven't been able to sign in on the laptop. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I don't know, all the weird little things. And then it's such a big project that I've often sort of wondered if I could make it make sense for this book to be two books, because it's really two separate storylines they're interconnected, but it's not.
They
Like,
depended
I
on
could
each
make-
other.
Yeah, like I could make the entire journey to the island one book, and then everything that happens on the island the second book. But the thing that stops me from doing that is that there's all the other regions of the empire that need to be covered too. So it really doesn't make sense. And I haven't decided if this is a situation where I'm sticking with one character as my protagonist, or if the series is going to have multiple protagonists. I don't know yet. And so it doesn't really make sense to divide this into two stories until I have some of those answers. And even then, I don't really think I want to do that.
I get that.
Yeah.
'Cause I just wrote a book like that where I wrote the whole thing. It was one story in my head, and it ended up being 110,000 words. When my first book was 40,000, that can't be the sequel. I had to cut it in two. And see, when I hit my halfway point, I'm like, my book should be done by now. So I ended up using my halfway point as a cliffhanger, essentially, for book 3. But it was a hard decision to do because it still feels like one book to me. It feels like one story.
Right.
If it was a different genre and I could get away with it, I would do that. But I can't get away with it because I published the first one at 40,000 words. So, which should have been longer. I've had reviews. It should have been longer. And I get it when I reread it. I'm like, yeah, that did kind of end very fast. But it's a series.
And it's
You
interesting
learn.
sometimes watching an author, because like sometimes an author will start up with 40,000-50,000 word the first couple of books, and then they move on in the series. Like Laurel K. Hamilton is an excellent example of this. Like she starts off with a normal sized book, particularly a normal sized book for when she first published Guilty Pleasures, the first in the Anita Blake series. And then if you look at her books now, they're just freaking enormous and cost $35.
The same is true of Sherilyn Kenyon. All of her early part of the series was really short. Then you get to Ashron, and that thing like 800 fucking pages. So I did that slowly with my first series, which I'm still not done with. But my first one was like 60. My second one was 70. My third one was 80, and I think my fourth one was 90. So like slowly creeping up in word count. My last one's probably going to be over 100 because I have to wrap everything up. But it's the finale. That's another thing that I'm really upset with myself over. And my other author, my Alishki one, where I have all these novellas. I have 13 novellas, which are all 15,000 words. And then I have a 110,000 word finale. But it was it was the end of the story. So I don't know. I think if you get invested up to that point, you've read all 13, you're going to be like, all right, I guess I will plug through that many more words.
Well, then if you're that invested in a particular author, like when you see them come out with a book and you look at the word count or the page count and it's bigger than you're used to seeing from them, you get there's more of it this time.
That's true. It's so funny. I was thinking about long books and how long sometimes they feel and how short sometimes they feel. Like, because when I read specifically like J. Kristoff's Nevernight series, Those were 24 to 28 hour books. I don't know what that is in page count, but my normal contemporary fantasy or romance is anywhere between 8 and 14 hours. So they were twice as long as a normal like paperback book.
Right.
And I read them all in 2 days. Like I read one in 2 days and the next one in 2 days. It didn't matter how long they were because the story moved that fast and I was excited to get back to it, even though I hated the way he ended that series. But that's one of those things where I'm like, he didn't do what I wanted him to do, but if it made sense to him, fine. I still think he was wrong, but fine. That was his choice. Sorry. But I've read some 6-hour books that took me weeks to clog through because it was just so stunted, if that makes sense.
I'm going to show my total lack of culture here because the one that took me forever to get through is Pride and Prejudice. It took me weeks to get through that book. And I know that it's just like the writing style of the time, you know, when she was alive and when she was writing it. And I get that. But at the same time, I'm just like, this is boring. She uses the same phrases over and over and over again. I honestly didn't find there to be a whole lot of substance to any of her characters. But that's the hot take because most people don't agree with me. Everybody's like, oh, Mr. Darcy. And I'm like, what about him?
You know what I did? Is I got through the first quarter of it, went, this is boring as fucking hell, and started skimming for Darcy's name. And that's how I read that book.
Unfortunately, that wasn't an option for me because I was reading it for an English class. And she wanted to do this whole like deep dive into it. It's not my favorite.
See, and this is why I always
really well because otherwise I would have failed that class because I had very different opinions from the teacher, and she was definitely one of those.
I was always the teacher that please argue with me, just make sure you back it up. And if it's opinion based, which a lot of like reader response kind of critiques are, then I can't tell you that you're wrong for interpreting it that way. I remember I had a teacher who was like, she marked down somebody on a paper, which was like a personal narrative, who argued that dogs had souls. She's like, dogs don't have souls. I'm like, what kind of backwards Catholic thinking are you clinging to here, lady? Yes, dogs have soul. Like if a human has a soul, a dog, every other animal has a damn soul. Get over yourself. Sorry. But like she knocked him for that. I'm like, just because his opinion is different than yours doesn't mean you get to downgrade what he's earned because I don't know. It's the reason I'm not in academia anymore. Besides the pay shit, but you know, sick of arguing with people who cannot think through both lenses, like both sides of something. Of course, I also live in Oklahoma, so you know. Shit, I was gonna say something else about. Oh, classics. This is the reason why I tend to go into classics braced my asshole, going, I'm not gonna like this. Sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised, but most of the time I'm accurate. This is boring as shit because they meandered through a story that could have been half the size, which is Pride and Prejudice could have been half the size.
A little over 2 years ago, so like shortly after we moved out to Monterey, there were some of the other spouses whose, you know, service member spouse was doing the same type of thing that Zach was doing. We got together and we started a book club, and so like it wasn't the first book, it was the second book that we read was Treasure Island.
Oh, goodness.
And we picked that one specifically because rumor has it that there's an area just south of Monterey called Point Lobos. It's a state park, and ostensibly the scenery from Point Lobos sort of influenced the scenery that he used in the book. So, you know, just kind of thought it was cool to tap into that. But reading through it, I was horrifically bored. And have you ever read it?
Mm-mm. It's not
So
even on my list to read.
it's a very like it's very much a coming of age adventure, you know, young boy, blah blah blah.
Mhm.
And in the beginning, he's living with his mom. They own like a pub house and inn type thing. And he gets convinced to go on this adventure with these people that he's just met. And like, so they find some other little boy to come help out at the end. And mom's just like, okay with this. And I really just kind of want to go back in time and look at the author and be like, have you ever met anybody who possesses a vagina? Because I don't think you can. Like, no mother I have ever met would be okay with just stubbing out for some other little kid so that her son can go run off across the world in search of treasure with a bunch of pirates that just randomly showed up one day.
Mm-hmm. I don't know why this reminds me of when I tried to read Moby Dick, which I got halfway through before I hit the summary. I had listened to the summary of the second half of it. But every time the main character called the native that was with them a noble savage, I was just like, Time Rain, have you ever actually met like somebody of that persuasion at all? For you to like continuously call, would you call them that to their face? Really? But also I find that's true of a lot of women depictions in general and a lot of classic literature that wasn't written by women. But I don't know. You know what classic I did enjoy? And I don't know if I've told you before, but if you haven't read Rebecca, which is funny, you should, because I went in with like absolute dismal expectations and was so pleasantly surprised. I think I gave it 5 stars. Like it was a good book. And it's not that old either, which is helpful. Because I think we're like 40s. Hold on, I'm gonna look this.
So. I can't remember if I've read it. I know about it. I can't remember if I've ever read it.
38 it was published. So one of the things I found exceptionally entertaining about this that my friend Betty Ann and I talked about after I read it was you hear so much about the character Rebecca, even though she's dead. She becomes such a central character, and you never learn the main character's name.
Huh.
So being haunted by a ghost of somebody, and it kind of takes over you. It's that kind of writing, I guess, the metaphorical sense of that was so entertaining to me. And of course, what actually happened to her was fantastic. Like I loved overall the entire the first part of it is like kind of gritting my teeth because there's so much be a good girl and be socially I almost said accurate, but that's not the word. Be proper and be a woman.
Right.
You know, you're too old to act like that and run around with a man who's older than you. It's inappropriate and all that other shit. And I'm like, just fuck off already. But that's because of the kind of woman I am, as you know. Once we got into like the relationship, it turned out really, really good. Especially with all the miscommunications that happen in the backstabbing, like wanting to ask something, but then being too afraid to ask something, and so you assume and you're wrong and all. Like it was great. I like it.
It's funny that you mentioned how you never learned the main character's name, and that kind of reminded me. There's a TikTok I saw recently. And I want to say it was an author page, and he was talking about writing a book as somebody who is blind. Because a lot of, particularly fiction, a lot of it depends on a lot of, we're primates, so it depends on a lot of visual cues. And it really got me thinking, like, what would it be like to write something where you take one of our primary or secondary senses and throw it out the fucking window?
It would be interesting. Like, what if you had a colorblind character? Right. I had so many students who were colorblind that I was like, you're missing a major part of like an assignment because you need to be able to see the colors. So ask somebody else what colors are there. But like taking away part of your senses, that's interesting as all get out. Mine often do a lot of scents. I like to lean into scenting things. I don't know why.
I see, like a lot of my, like if I were to go back, way back at Bonnie Ooey, trying to figure out where I know there was somewhere in here where I had talked about. So like this one section here, they're visiting some tropical islands, and she's talking about the white sand and the warm breeze and the way it blew her hair across the back of her neck, and it sticks and her hair is curling because the air is really heavy with moisture, it's very humid. Talking about the scents that are in the air when you're in a tropical place, the fruits and the really dense vegetative smells, and so it's kind of I try to be very immersive, like I'm talking about the sound of the monkeys and the birds in the trees and what it's like on the docks when you've got the workers and they're shouting back and forth, and you're just trying to encompass as much as possible while also not, turning myself into Stephen King or Anne Rice and spending 8 chapters on 2 or 3 details.
Sorry. I'm glad you brought up Anne Rice in that context, because I can't read her shit either. I tried. I had to read 3 of her books for an assignment for work. And
her writing is very, very dense. And that's not to say it's not good. Like, I know we tend to use dense as a negative descriptor, but I feel like both her and Stephen King, they just pack so much in, and I feel like Diana Gabaldon kind of does this too to some extent, but I love her writing, so I mean, maybe I'm just picky about the way it gets pulled off, but
good storyline, too much, just too much.
There's a lot, but I've reread her books, at least the Outlander series, a couple of times at this point, particularly because every time a new one comes out, I've forgotten 3/4 of what happened, so I have to go back and reread all of it so I'll understand what's happening in the new stuff. And it's a lot, when you've got 1,400 page books, paperbacks, like there's going to be a lot in there.
There's only been one long book like that I've ever felt like I didn't need to edit anything out of, and go figure, it was Brandon Sanderson. I've only read one of his books though, so to be fair. But like Outlander, I was like, I could have cut 150 pages out of this. Same with Deborah Harkness's first novel. I would have cut 100 pages of that. Every Stephen King I've read, and like I cut a couple hundred pages out of this. So right. I'm with you there. I don't like it when people take too long to get to their point.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one thing if like, if you have a character that's going through something, like for a great example would be shock, right? When you're in shock, everything feels very distant, like you're staring through like a pinhole, but also very, very detailed and tangible. And like it's a very weird feeling. Mm-hmm. And so in a situation like that, I feel like it makes sense to sort of fixate on things because it's a very good way to show how that feels without saying what I just said,
Right. Well, there's a way of showing it and doing that versus making your entire story that way.
Right. Or like, you've got some characters sitting around, smoking a joint, and maybe they're not used to it. So the next thing you know, they're fixating on little details because, whoa, just weird little things like that make sense. But the whole book doing it does get to be pretty heavy, I think. And, no practice today. Cool. Yay. I think that like there's a time and a place for the heaviness. And sometimes I will say that sometimes I really do enjoy like the amped up scenery. Like if you have a character who, a good example is the Outlander books. She goes back in time and, so she's experiencing the world in ways that she never has before. So it kind of makes sense that she's more aware of, what does it smell like? What plants are around? What time of year is it? How does the wind feel? So you get all of these little different sensory details, which I think, kind of makes sense. But, at this point, I mean, she's been in the past for 20 years. Get over it. Like, that's home now.
You no longer be noticing those things as heavily as she did in the first one. And see, I didn't have a problem with that in the first one. A lot of the traveling kind of stuff, I feel like you can just tell me they got there.
Yeah.
I don't need.
There are some interactions where, like, and I mean, like, half of my book is traveling from one point to another, but the interactions during the travel are important,
Mm-hmm.
So if you're focusing on that, then yeah, it makes sense to have a long travel period. But
you're also having things happen, I'm gonna guess, during the travel.
Right. So we've got we leave the capital city and we've got a couple of stops where, we're downloading goods for trade and uploading other goods for trade, and then we're going to the next place and stuff happens in those ports and they meet people in those ports and they experience things that they've never experienced before. And so all of that really kind of builds into not just the plot arc, but the character development as well, and how they grow together, which is important, not just for them, but also for, this whole obsession with balance that has to be honored. And so, that time on the ship is imperative because, if you start this arranged marriage, knowing that when you get to where you're going, you have to have struck balance between the two of you. And now we're skipping 2 months of travel time and now you're there. Have you met any of those balance requirements? And if so, how did that happen?
Right.
So
I've read several books where the journey was the main part of the story.
Yeah.
So
and I mean, and that's why, and that goes back to why I think that in some ways I could split it into 2 books, because it really is 2 interconnected but separate stories. But that only works if I take the series in a specific direction. And I don't know that that's the direction that I want to go in yet.
Brings me back to just write the story and then you can figure that out.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a couple of ideas that are sort of nagging at me a little bit that won't stop. But you and I will have a separate discussion about that at some point.
A non-public one. Yes, I get it. Well, sweetheart, I think I'm going to make some food and I got to pee. So I think an hour and a half is a good lifetime. I'm sure we could talk for hours about writing stuff in books, but we'll be here. It's coming Tuesday. What date is Tuesday?
I don't. Oh, it's the 16th, because on the 17th, I'm supposed to go to an orientation for a community darkroom and I can't find a babysitter.
Fun.
And I took a roll and a half of black and white film at the wedding this past weekend. And I'm okay letting a Photoshop handle the film itself and the negatives, but I want to enlarge the prints. Can't do that without the darkroom. And I can't use the darkroom without doing the orientation. And they only do it on Wednesdays, which of course it's Wednesdays because that's when Taylor has soccer practice. And that's the one day a week that Zach has a nighttime class and doesn't get home until after 9 o'clock.
It works that way, right?
Yeah. Honestly, part of me is tempted to just email her back and be like, hey, is there any way that you can make an exception and do this at a different time during the week? But
it's always no if you don't ask. So
yeah.
Ask.
And of course, it's all the way on Capitol Hill. So that means and they only do them at 5 o'clock in the evenings on Wednesdays, which means going into the city, okay, fine, no problem. Coming out of the city 45 minutes later, problem.
Yep. You'll have to tell me about how the wedding went at a later date. Yeah. So
the
16th.
You know what I'm looking forward to? Because you're still going up to Mom's, right?
Mm-hmm.
I am so looking forward to crashing that party for a day or 2.
I do have questions for you on that, but we can do that again, not on here.
Yeah.
So real quick, to end this out, we will be back here on the 16th at 8:15 Eastern, 7:15 Central, which is my time. And don't know what we're going to talk about, but it's going to be book related.
We'll figure it out.
So,
And
yeah.
we'll go off on tangents that have nothing to do with it. Guaranteed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us, and we will see
Thanks,
you
guys.
next time. Bye.